Have you ever built something when nobody was watching? Not because a deadline was coming, not because someone would check, not because anything external required it of you. Just because you said you would, and you kept saying you would, every morning, alone, in the dark, before the world started paying attention. Most people haven't. Most people build when someone is watching, when something is at stake, when the result will be visible, when the work produces evidence they can show. And when the audience disappears, the building stops. Have you ever met someone who builds anyway? Who shows up on the morning when nothing requires it? Who practices when no match is coming? Who works when the only witness is their own standard? You know what people say about them. They're obsessed, they're extreme, they don't know how to relax. But here's what nobody tells you. Everything you have ever admired in someone was built in private, in the years before it became visible, in the sessions nobody saw, in the mornings that produced no immediate evidence of anything. The light you see was built in the dark. Miyamoto Musashi won 62 duels and never lost one. Everyone knows that story. Here is the one nobody tells. He stopped fighting at 29, undefeated, at the peak of his power. He walked away from every duel and spent the next 30 years building himself in conditions that offered no audience, no victory, no external proof that anything was happening. He painted, he sculpted, he wrote, he practiced calligraphy, he meditated for days, he taught students. He worked in complete obscurity, doing things that looked nothing like the legend everyone had built around him. And the quality he brought to the brush was the same quality he had brought to the sword. Before I show you how he built it, subscribe and drop a comment. Tell me one thing you are building right now that nobody knows about yet. I read every single one. Now Japan 1612. The Last Duel, and the 30 years that followed it that nobody romanticizes. Chapter 1. The Painting Nobody Saw. Somewhere in Japan, around 1638, Musashi sat alone with a brush and a piece of paper. He was not painting for a patron, not for a student, not for anyone who would ever see it. He painted a dead branch, a single bird perched on it, nothing else. When he finished, he set it aside. He did not sign it in the way masters signed work intended for others. He kept it, not because it was his best work, because it was entirely his. This is the version of Musashi nobody builds statues of. Not the warrior on the dueling ground, the man alone with a brush, making something for the only witness that had ever mattered to him. His own standard. He had stopped fighting duels 9 years earlier, not because he had run out of opponents, because he had understood something that the duels, with all their external pressure and visible stakes, could not teach him. The quality of presence he needed could not be produced by external pressure. It had to exist without it. So he had spent 9 years finding out whether it could. The painting on his table was the answer. It could. Chapter 2. What Musashi actually practiced for 30 years. The years everyone skips. Musashi left a record of this period, not detailed in the way a diary is detailed, but present in his paintings, in his letters, in the texts he produced, in the accounts of the students who trained with him. He woke before dawn, every day, not because a match was coming, because that was when the practice happened. The discipline was not imposed from outside. It had no external reason. It was simply who he was by this point in his life. The morning practice was not something he did. It was something he was. He meditated. The Zen tradition he had encountered during his years of travel had given him a framework for something he had been doing instinctively since childhood. The practice of sitting with the mind in complete stillness, watching it without following it, not suppressing thought, observing it the way you observe weather from inside a house. Present to it without being moved by it. This was not a separate practice from the sword work. It was the same practice in a different position. The quality of mind he developed in meditation was the quality of mind that had made him unbeatable in duels. The ability to be completely present without the overlay of commentary, analysis, self-evaluation. The mind that did not split itself between observing and performing. The mind that simply responded to what was there. He called this mushin, no mind, not the absence of thought, but the absence of the observer watching the thought. The direct engagement with what was present without the layer of self-consciousness that slows response and introduces hesitation. He practiced his sword forms alone, without a partner, the same forms he had practiced for 40 years, not to maintain skill, to maintain the quality of attention that had always been the source of the skill. The forms were not the practice. The forms were the vehicle for the practice. The practice was the undivided presence he brought to them. This distinction is easy to miss and important not to. A person can perform sword forms with technically correct execution while their attention is partially elsewhere. The forms look right from the outside. The practice is hollow from the inside. Musashi's forms were not technically better than the forms of other masters of his era. The difference was the quality of attention inside the execution. Complete, undivided, with nothing held back for self-monitoring or outcome management. This was what he was maintaining in those solitary morning sessions. Not the technique, the attention behind the technique. He painted. His works are in museums now. Ink paintings of birds in flight, of bamboo in wind, of the spare and precise natural images that Japanese ink painting has always favored. They are not the paintings of a warrior who dabbled in art. They are the paintings of someone who brought everything he had to the act of making a mark on paper. The same quality of presence that allowed him to read an opponent's next movement before it happened allowed him to feel the brush on paper in a way that produced something alive rather than merely skillful. In traditional Japanese ink painting, there is no correcting a mark once it is made. The brush touches the paper and the mark is what it is. This requires a specific quality of commitment at the moment of contact. No hesitation, no half measure. The same quality Musashi had developed across 40 years of sword practice expressed itself naturally through the brush. He was not learning a new discipline. He was expressing an existing one through a new medium. He sculpted, made functional objects of iron and wood, not as a hobby, as a continuation of the same practice, under different conditions. The hands working with material, finding its resistance and its nature, responding to what was there rather than imposing what was imagined. He wrote, Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings, was written in a cave near the end of his life, not as a retrospective, as a living document of a practice still in progress, the understanding still being refined, the territory still being explored. He was in his 50s and 60s when he wrote it, and the writing has the quality of someone still discovering rather than someone summarizing what they already knew. And he taught. Students came to him from across Japan. He took the ones who were genuinely seeking and turned away the ones who wanted the legend. He gave his students what no school had given him, not technique, the understanding behind technique, the quality of presence that made technique work. He was not teaching sword. He was teaching the thing the sword had been a vehicle for all along. This is what 30 years of building in the dark produced. Not more victories, not more duels, something that victories could never have produced on their own. A life that was entirely itself, consistent in every direction. The same man at the painting table that he had been on the dueling ground. The same quality of attention, the same quality of presence, the same complete commitment to what the hands were doing. At the moment, the hands were doing it. This is what building in the dark accumulates toward. Not a skill, a self. Chapter 3. Why he stopped at the peak. This is the question most people never ask. Why did Musashi stop at 29? The easy answer is that he had proven everything he needed to prove, that there were no worthy opponents left, that he had accomplished what he set out to accomplish. But Musashi's own writing suggests something different. He did not write about the duels as accomplishments. He wrote about them as information. Each duel had revealed something about the state of his practice. Something his daily training could not reveal in the same way because training lacked the specific pressure of a situation where the cost of a mistake was absolute. By the time he fought Kojiro, he had extracted what the duels had to offer, not the victories, the information, the precise understanding of where his mind was still moving when it should be still, where his technique still depended on conscious thought rather than complete automaticity, where he was still a person doing something rather than something being expressed through a person. The duels had been his testing ground. Once the testing was complete, the testing ground was no longer necessary. What he needed was not more tests, more practice, deeper practice. Practice in conditions the duel could not provide. The duel lasted minutes. The brush required hours of sustained presence. The sculpture required days. The meditation required the willingness to sit with the mind, going nowhere for as long as necessary. These practices were harder than the duels in a specific way. The duels were not hard. In a duel, the external pressure creates the focus. The stakes produce the quality of attention. You cannot afford to be elsewhere, and so you are entirely here. In practice alone, with no external pressure, with no stakes, with nothing requiring anything of you except your own standard, the focus has to come from inside. The quality of attention has to be self-generated. There is nothing external to produce it. This is the harder practice. And this is what Musashi chose for the last 30 years of his life. Not because it was comfortable, because it was necessary for what he was trying to build. The quality of presence that can be summoned under external pressure is useful. The quality of presence that exists independent of external pressure is something else. Something that cannot be given or taken by circumstances. That functions identically whether anyone is watching or not. That was what Musashi was building in the dark. Chapter 4. The Science of Building in the Dark. What Musashi understood through practice, modern research has documented through study. The phenomenon researchers call intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation maps almost exactly onto what Musashi was demonstrating. Extrinsic motivation is produced by external reward, recognition, outcome, audience, consequence. When those things are present, performance often improves. When they disappear, performance often drops, sometimes below the level it was before the external reward was introduced. This is called the over-justification effect. When you begin to associate an activity with external reward, the activity stops being its own reason. It becomes a means to an end. And when the end is removed, the means loses its energy. Musashi's 30 years of post-duel practice was the opposite of this. He removed every external reward. No audience, no victory, no outcome that anyone would notice. He was left with the practice itself, and the practice itself had to be enough. This is what intrinsic motivation produces when it is the only thing driving behavior over decades, not the burst of performance that external pressure creates, something more durable. A practice that continues because stopping it would mean being less than what you are, not less than what you appear, less than what you actually are. Researchers who study mastery across domains have found a consistent pattern. The practitioners who reach the highest levels are almost never those who were most motivated by external recognition in the early years. They are the ones who found something in the practice itself, a quality of engagement that made the practice worth doing for what it produced inside them rather than for what it produced for anyone watching. Musashi describes this in his writings without using this language. He writes about the importance of training when no training is formally required, of practicing the forms even when no match is coming, of bringing the same quality of attention to painting that you bring to combat, because the quality of attention is the practice, not the activity it is applied to. The activity changes, the practice doesn't. This is what 30 years of building in the dark produces. Not a collection of skills, a quality of being that expresses itself in whatever the hands are doing. Musashi wrote something near the end of his life that stopped one of his students. The student asked him what the difference was between his early practice and his later practice, between the years of dueling and the years of painting and writing and solitary work. Musashi thought for a moment. In the early years, he said, I practiced to become. In the later years, I practiced because I was. The student did not understand immediately. Musashi explained, when you practice to become something, the practice is in service of a future state. When you arrive at that state, or believe you have, the practice loses its purpose. But when the practice is the expression of what you already are, it does not need a destination, it simply continues. You want to see, he looked at the student. The dark years, as you call them, were not years of building toward something. They were years of being what the earlier building had made me. The building does not stop. The reason for building changes. He paused. In times very different from this one, others will face what every serious practitioner faces, the question of what to do when the external reward is removed. when no audience is watching, when nothing external is requiring the work. If you recognize that question in your own life, walk this path. The answer is the same in every era. A single tap tells the algorithm this matters. Chapter 5. What the dark years actually looked like. Musashi's later years were not romantic. There is a version of this story that makes the obscurity sound peaceful. The wise master in serene retreat, painting birds by candlelight, at peace with himself and the world. That is not what the accounts suggest. Musashi was restless. He moved frequently. He was difficult to live with. His standards for his own work were so high that he destroyed pieces that his students considered masterworks. He was in his 60s, still rising before dawn and practicing forms that he had practiced 10,000 times before. He was also, by all accounts, genuinely alive in a way that many people who have achieved external success are not. Because he had not attached himself to the external success, the victories had come and gone. The reputation had formed around him like a shell. He lived inside the practice, not inside the reputation. And the practice was ongoing and demanding and endlessly revealing in a way that settled reputations never are. One of his students recorded this about him. On the morning that a letter arrived, informing Musashi that a significant honor was being offered by a regional lord, he read the letter, set it aside, and returned to his calligraphy practice for the rest of the morning without further comment. The student asked him afterward if he intended to respond to the offer. Musashi said he would consider it when the morning practice was complete. It was not indifference to the honor. It was the specific ordering of priorities that the dark years had produced. The practice was the center. Everything else was the periphery. And the periphery, however significant it appeared from the outside, did not interrupt the center. This is what building in the dark produces over decades. Not indifference to outcome, a relationship with outcome that is no longer the organizing principle of your days. The practice organizes the days. The outcomes arrange themselves around it. Chapter 6. The Paintings. Musashi's paintings deserve more attention than they usually receive in accounts of his life. They are not the work of a warrior who dabbled in art during retirement. They are among the finest examples of Japanese ink painting from their period. They are studied in art schools. They are in permanent collections. They are considered separately from his martial legacy and found to be significant on their own terms. This should be surprising. A man who spent the first half of his life fighting duels should not be capable of producing work of this quality in a discipline as demanding as traditional Japanese ink painting. Unless the discipline was never really the sword. Unless what Musashi had been building all along was something that the sword was one expression of, and the brush was another. The quality that makes his paintings exceptional is the same quality that made him unbeatable in duels, a complete presence in the moment of making the mark, no hesitation, no correction, no tentative half measures. In traditional Japanese ink painting, the mark is made once, and it is what it is. There is no going back over it, no refining it, no hiding indecision behind more paint. The brush touches the paper, and something either happens or it doesn't. The quality that allows that kind of mark is the quality Musashi had spent 50 years building. Mushin, the no-mind state, the absence of the observer watching the act. The brush and the hand and the eye and the intention all operating as one thing rather than as a person doing something. He had built this in the dark. In the morning, practices with no audience. In the forms repeated alone, when no match was coming. In the meditation sessions where the only thing happening was the mind learning to stop interfering with itself. And when he picked up the brush, it was already there. Not learned for painting, present from the practice. Transferred because what had been built was not a sword skill, it was a quality of being. Chapter 7. What this means for your dark years. Most people's dark years do not look romantic. They look like waking up early for work nobody has asked for yet. Practicing a skill that has no immediate application. Writing something nobody will read until it is ready. Building a body of knowledge or technique or understanding that currently impresses nobody, including sometimes yourself. The dark years are the years when the gap between your current output and your eventual standard is most visible and most discouraging. Musashi's dark years looked like a legendary warrior making paintings. Your dark years look like whatever you are doing right now that produces no external evidence that anything is happening. The temptation is to stop, to do what produces visible results, to practice when something external requires it, and rest when it doesn't, to let the audience determine the schedule. This is the choice that keeps most people exactly where they are. Because the audience will always arrive after the work is done. The recognition comes after the quality is built. The external reward follows internal development. You cannot skip the dark years and arrive at the light. Here is what the dark years actually require. Not inspiration, not motivation, not discipline in the motivational poster sense of the word. 3 specific things. The first is a standard that exists independent of audience. Musashi's standard was not determined by what his students thought of his paintings or what anyone thought of his calligraphy. His standard was his own sense of whether the quality of presence in the work met what he knew it could be. This standard was higher than any external standard anyone would have applied to him. A standard that exists independent of audience is the only kind that functions in the dark. External standards disappear when the audience disappears. Internal standards do not. The second is the ability to find the work itself rewarding. This cannot be manufactured at the start. It develops through time inside the practice. In the early period, the gap between what you produce and what you can see it could be is enormous and discouraging. Most people leave at this stage. The practitioners who stay discover something on the other side of that discomfort. The work itself begins to provide something that external recognition cannot. A quality of engagement that feels more like being completely alive while doing something than like being appreciated.